regions have been such an important area of collaboration across our nations. It's a place of shared cultural values, shared ecological values, and we have so much to learn from each other. And so this event hopefully will continue to contribute to that shared knowledge and shared communication in this important area. So we're going to have a series of presentations. Most of them will be recorded, but our colleagues will be available. They're all of our presenters are online, and they'll be available for Q&A sessions. And again, we have simultaneous interpretation. Thank you to Raymond and Kate for helping us with our interpretation. And I'd like to then introduce Molly McCammon, our host, our facilitator, moderator. Molly is a senior advisor with the Alaska Oceans Observing System. She was previously the director of AOS for 16 years. Before that, she was the director of the Exxon Valdez Trustees Council. Molly is a longtime Alaskan, and she has done so much to bring science to the public and to make science accessible to many different groups of people. And we thank her for that excellent work and AOS's role in this. Just one more reminder, we have bios of the speakers in the chat. We also have the agenda in the chat. And I think that I'll hand it over to you, Molly.
Thanks very much, Margaret. I appreciate that. Good morning, everyone, or good evening, depending on what time zone you're in. We're grateful. We now have over 130 people online, so this is a great attendance. I'm not going to give too much background about our speakers because, as Margaret mentioned, the bios are in the chat and you can get more detail. So we're going to get right into it with our first speaker, who is Dr. Lyle Britt, who is the Director of the Resource Assessment and Conservation Engineering Division of the Alaska Fisheries Science Center. And he'll be speaking on recent changes in the distribution and abundance of Eastern and Northern Bering Sea groundfish species. So go ahead, Lyle.
Hello, I am Lyle Britt, the Director of the Resource Assessment and Conservation Engineering Division at the Alaska Fisheries Science Center. I have been a fisheries research biologist with the Alaska Fisheries Science Center for over 25 years, with the majority of that time spent working in the Bering Sea. Today I'm going to present some trends we have observed in Bering Sea groundfish species from our bottom trawl surveys conducted in what we define as our Northern and Eastern Bering Sea survey areas. Note that the Alaska Fisheries Science Center, and particularly the Race Division, is responsible for conducting multiple different surveys throughout Alaska with the goals of providing informed data sets for stock assessment of commercially, culturally, and ecologically important fish and invertebrate species, and for ecosystem monitoring used to track and predict overall ecosystem health. These surveys also provide foundational data for bettering our understanding of the effects of climate change throughout Alaska. But for this talk, I'm going to focus on results for two of our bottom trawl surveys conducted in the Bering Sea: the Eastern Bering Sea Shelf Survey, commonly referred to as the EBS survey, and one of our more recent developments of a time series in the Northern Bering Sea, which we commonly refer to as the Mbs survey. The EBS survey has been conducted annually since 1982, using the same standardized survey design and methodology. The Mbs survey was started up using the same methodology used in the EBS survey, but more recently, and with the initial start year of 2010. The Mbs survey was initiated because of ecosystem concerns from our researchers associated with the loss of seasonal sea ice in the Bering Sea. The survey was started with the initial goal of conducting the survey biennially. However, we were unable to return to the Mbs again until 2017, and the survey has been effectively annual ever since due to the significance of the results in recent years to our understanding of how warming is changing species distribution patterns in the region. Note that in 2020, both surveys were canceled due to the COVID pandemic, and in 2018, only a partial survey was conducted in the Mbs region. Both surveys use a systematic design consisting of a 20 by 20 nautical mile grid, and we sample the center of each grid cell, which are represented by the dots on this map. The Eastern Bering Sea survey consists of 376 stations, whereas the Northern Bering Sea survey has 144 stations. In addition to collecting data on the fish and invertebrates caught at each station, we also collect environmental data at each station, such as water temperature, salinity, and light. Samples are collected at each station using the 83112 Eastern bottom trawl, which is towed for 30 minutes of on-bottom time at each station. These nets are constructed and certified for use by members of our research fishing gear program at the Alaska Fisheries Science Center. Detailed survey sampling protocols and trawl construction diagrams can be found in the reference document by Stauffer. Recent changes in the distribution and abundance patterns of groundfish populations in the Eastern and Northern Bering Sea are thought to be heavily influenced by water temperature. If we examine the mean surface and near bottom water temperature observed during the surveys depicted in the upper panel of figures, particularly the left panel, which shows mean surface and near bottom water temperature throughout the time series, we can see that during the early years of the time series, mean bottom temperature showed small random departures from the mean, depicted by the dotted lines. However, from the mid-1990s to present, we see larger and increasingly longer departures from the mean that we've come to refer to as warm and cold stanzas. We are currently in a warm stanza that started in 2014. We also track the extent of what we refer to as the Bering Sea cold pool, which is the lower figure. The cold pool is the result of cold, briny, dense water that settles near the bottom in the Bering Sea as a result of the formation of sea ice. So, the extent, quality, and duration of seasonal sea ice coverage in the Bering Sea from the previous winter is instrumental in defining the extent of the cold pool observed during our summer bottom trawl surveys. The cold pool can serve as a barrier to subarctic fishes and conversely a refuge for Arctic species. As such, the cold pool plays a big role in ecosystem structuring throughout the Bering Sea. Oceanographers define the cold pool as those waters that are below 2 degrees C, which is defined by the light blue area in the figure. However, the limitation to subarctic fish distribution
I stopped getting any sound. That's the interpreter talking. I don't know what's.
Okay, sorry, I'm not sure what's going on. Hold on.
distribution tends to be closer to 0 degrees, indicated by the dark indigo blue color. The extent of the cold pool varies greatly.
Is that back?
It came back briefly, Stephanie, but it's off again.
From one year to the next. For instance, in 1999, nearly 80% of the EBS survey area was within the cold pool, whereas in 2018, less than 2% of the survey area met the cold pool area definition. In 2021, our most recent survey, 12% of the area met the cold pool definition. Spatially, this is what the surface and bottom temperatures look like for the 4 survey years, 2010, 17, 19, and 21, in which all of the stations were sampled in the EBS and NBS survey regions. 2010 was considered a cold year, and as you can see, much of the middle domain of the Eastern Bering Sea was within the cold pool, which consists of the area contained in the dark blue and black areas in the figure. Even the surface waters were much colder in 2010 than what was observed in the more recent survey years, all of which were within a warm stanza. In 2017, we can see that the cold pool is more limited than observed in 2010, and in particular, there is less of the near bottom water temperatures that are below 0, again depicted by the black colored areas of these figures. In the most recent survey years of 2019 and 21, the cold pool has been limited to waters in the northwesternmost portion of the survey grid, effectively right along the US-Russia transboundary line. Moving on to examining the distribution and abundance trends of some of the key species of interest for this meeting, walleye pollock seems like a good place to start. The distribution in 2010 was typical of a cold year, with the highest densities of pollock observed along the western edge of the survey area. As you should recall, the eastern edge of this distribution aligns with the edge of the cold pool that we observed in 2010. Additionally, very few pollock were observed in the northern Bering Sea region, And the few that were observed were predominantly small one-year-old fish. However, in 2017, the distribution pattern changed markedly. With the reduction in cold pool,
I think we lost sound again.
area, we observed higher densities of pollock distributed throughout the middle domain of the Eastern Bering Sea survey area and high densities of adult pollock in the Northern Bering Sea, particularly north of St. Lawrence Island and west along the transboundary line with Russia. Large catches of pollock were observed all the way to the northernmost extent of the survey at the Bering Strait. In fact, as you can see in the biomass table at the bottom, our estimate of pollock biomass in the Northern Bering Sea in 2017 was over 6,000% higher than in 2010. This trend was largely the same in 2019. Our most recent survey, we saw a similar distribution pattern, but an overall reduction in pollock biomass. 2021 represents the third lowest biomass estimate in the time series for the Eastern Bering Sea, and while pollock biomass was also declined from 2019 estimates in the Northern Bering Sea, it is still above the levels that we observed in our one cold year in this data series. A very similar pattern in distribution was observed for Pacific cod. Again, in 2010, the distribution pattern of Pacific cod is very much defined by the extent and pattern of the cold pool, and we observe very few Pacific cod in the Northern Bering Sea. In 2017, Pacific cod are distributed across the Eastern Bering Sea shelf, and we see an almost 900% increase in cod biomass in the Northern Bering Sea, with a similar distribution pattern to what was observed with pollock, with much of the fish aligning along the US-Russia transboundary line all the way to the Bering Strait. This trend continued in 2019 and 21, with the exception that in 2021 we observed fewer Pacific cod in the Northern Bering Sea, and most of those fish were south of St. Lawrence Island. The results are very different for more Arctic species, such as the Arctic cod. Arctic cod distribution is typically limited to the cooler waters encountered during our summer bottom trawl surveys, which are usually in or adjacent to the cold pool. As such, we see a much more limited distribution pattern in the recent survey years when compared to 2010, and significant declines in biomass. Overall, recent surveys observed greater than 90% declines in the estimated biomass of Arctic cod when compared to 2010. For a larger context, just looking at the last two survey years at species of interest in the Eastern Bering Sea, there is a notable trend that the species that are increasing in number or biomass, colored green, are largely species with large distributional extents. Some, such as the northern rock sole, flathead sole, Pacific halibut, and Bering skate, have population extents all the way south to California. However, many of the species that have been recently in decline, such as pollock, Alaska plaice, Greenland turbot, and Kamchatka flounder, have much more limited distributions and may be more sensitive to recent warming conditions. With that, I would like to acknowledge those that make these surveys happen. I may be the one that's been asked to present these results, but these surveys are thanks to the tireless efforts of a great many people. The surveys are largely staffed by our groundfish and shellfish assessment programs, but we also receive invaluable staffing help from several other groups, from the Alaska Fisheries Science Center, the state of Alaska, universities, and industry groups. And none of that would matter without the tireless efforts of our survey support groups and the cooperation that we receive from companies and crews of the vessels we charter for our survey operations. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thanks, Lyle. I just wanted to say, since this was recorded and we lost a little bit of the recording, were there any points there that you wanted to bring up that were missed now? We're going to have a Q&A after the first three speakers, but is there anything there that you needed to bring up?
Thanks, Molly. Yes, the recording stuff can be a little challenging sometimes.
Yeah.
Maybe while we switch it over, it hung up the most on talking about the cold pool in the Bering Sea. And so I think the point I was trying to make there is the cold pool changes. It does shift from one year to the next based on the extent of seasonal sea ice from the previous winter. Historically, the cold pool could be quite large. As much as 80% of what we would consider to be the aerial coverage of the Eastern Bering Sea could reside under cold pool waters. However, in recent years, it's been incredibly small. In 2018, only 2% of the Eastern Bering Sea was within the cold pool. And while it's been higher in the last couple of years, like 12% in 2021, effectively, that's really not much of a barrier to fish migration movement patterns. And it may be one of the large players in restructuring the kind of the ecosystem of the Bering Sea.
Okay, thanks. I'm sure there'll be some more questions and comments when we get to that. So we're going to move on to our Russian colleagues now. And our first speaker is actually going to be live. This isn't a recorded one, and it's with Olga Maznikova, and she is with the Russian Federal Research Institute of Fisheries and Oceanography. And she'll be speaking about pollock distribution, biology, stocks, and fishing in the Chukchi Sea. So thanks, Olga. Go ahead. You may still be on mute.
Уважаемые коллеги, здравствуйте.
My dear colleagues, I greet you all. I'm very happy to see you all, and thank you for this opportunity to take part in our event.
Арктическая треска, или как
Polar cod, known in Russian as saiga, is one of the key species in Arctic ecosystem. And thanks to large populations, it serves as a reliable indicator of changes in Arctic ecosystems. And it's in the food web of Arctic Ocean, it occupies a central position. At present, the interest to the study of polar cod is on the rise worldwide. We also engage in polar cod research, not only in the Chukchi Sea, but in the whole eastern sector of the Arctic Ocean, not ignoring the Bering Sea either. The purpose of this research or survey was to find out characteristics of polar cod in Chukchi Sea, and this slide briefly summarizes our baseline information. And
Тут небольшой кусочек то, как
gives you a glimpse of how these surveys are performed in the field. The vessel is shown here, tin rod, which was mostly employed, and our trial catches. The outcome of this result, of this survey, the findings were quite interesting in terms of spatial pattern, peculiarities of this species biology, and its stocks or reserves. You can see from this slide, polar cod in Chukchi Sea doesn't form any dense clusters, at least in its Russian part. It's a somewhat scattered pattern, and the highest catches were registered closer to the Bering Strait, Cape Dezhnev, that is to say, in places where there is some inflow of warmer oceanic waters. Also, pretty much all the denser clusters were found in areas of higher densities of plankton. As far as the benthic cod are concerned, also the higher concentrations are closer to the Bering Strait and areas richer in plankton. In the northern part of the sector surveyed, the pattern presented here on the diagram B, we didn't find any patterns, any regular patterns in distribution of polar cod, such as statistically relevant correlations with water temperature or something else. So it's mostly driven by plankton densities after all. In pelagic and benthic layers, the composition of polar cod by age and size was different. In both pelagic and benthic layers, one could also observe year-to-year variations between the year 2003 and 2021, we see the populations getting much younger on average. And benthic clusters of all are mostly older species, and surface clusters are mostly represented by younger cod, which is probably somehow related to their life cycle. I would also note, speaking of the state of the fishery, the state of fish stocks, even though Cape Cod has a short life, and its short life cycle may support high catches, yet in the Russian part of Chukchi Sea, polar cod cannot be viewed upon as a promising commercial species, which is due mostly to low profitability or non-profitability of fishing cod. Cod is very cheap in the Russian domestic market. In conclusion, I would like to thank all the participants of these surveys, Sail and the mothership Tinro, and all the other parties involved in this work. At this, my very brief presentation is over, and I would be happy to entertain questions.
Thank you, Olga. We're going to wait until after Pavel speaks. And our next speaker is Pavel Yamelin, who's also from the Russian Federal Research Institute of Fisheries and Oceanography, and he will be speaking about Arctic cod. So we go ahead with that presentation.
Hello, everyone. Dear colleagues, my name is Pavel Yamelin. I am a lead specialist of the Department of Fishes of Russian Forests and Seas in Vnero. Let me present a study of distribution, biological features and prospects for fishing of walleye pollock in the western Chukchi Sea. Walleye pollock is the most abundant and widely distributed species of the North Pacific. Its range extends from the Chukchi Sea in the north to the waters of Korea, Japan and California in the south. Walleye pollock stock is commercially valuable, and this fish occupying a leading position in terms of catch volume in the North Pacific Ocean. Due to its high abundance, walleye pollock plays an important role in the North Pacific ecosystems, participating in various trophic chains from invertebrates to predatory fish, marine mammals and birds as predator and prey. In the Chukchi Sea, walleye pollock juveniles were first found in small quantities in the late 1970s. However, until recently, there was no information on the occurrence of adult walleye pollock in the Chukchi Sea. In August of 2019,
I think we lost the audio again.
During a bottom trawl survey our study is based on data of bottom and mid-water trawl surveys performed on board of research vessels Tinro and Professor Leonidov. Research area are presented on the slide. In total, from 2003 to 2020, 7 research cruises were conducted in the waters of the western Chukchi Sea during the summer-autumn period, when the water is free from ice as possible. In the water column, schoolings were mainly represented by juveniles, while medium-sized and large individuals in catches were rare. We reveal some interannual differences. Thus, in 2003, walleye pollock individuals were recorded mainly in the southeastern part of the region, near the Bering Strait, where an influx of warm Bering Sea waters was observed. Schoolings were represented by juvenile fish only. In 2007, walleye pollock was observed only as 2 local accumulations. The bulk of the schooling was formed by juveniles. Adults were recorded in the central part of the surveyed area. In 2008, the bulk of catches were formed by juveniles as in previous years of research. Since 2010, research in the Chukchi Sea has been carried out by bottom trawl only. In this year, a single individual was recorded in a catch near Cape Dizhnev within the warm Bering Sea waters inflow. Spatial distribution of walleye pollock from 2018 to 2020 are presented on the slide. According to our results, the character of the spatial distribution of walleye pollock in the western Chukchi Sea does not fundamentally differ from that in other parts of its range. Thus, schoolings in the water column during all the years of research were mainly represented by juveniles, which proportion varied from 93 to 100%, while medium-sized and large individuals in catches were rare. In bottom trawl catches, walleye pollock was represented mainly by both juveniles and large-sized fish, and the proportion of medium-sized individuals was insignificant. Observed patterns of the spatial distribution of walleye pollock in the western Chukchi Sea seems closest to that of the Aleut-Navalnyshty area of the Bering Sea. There, juveniles and large individuals are found within the shallow depths of the shelf, while medium-sized fish feed in more northern and deeper areas. The character of the spatial distribution of walleye pollock is subject to strong variability and is determined by the abundance of its generations, oceanological conditions, and food availability. Walleye pollock in general occurs within the range from the surface to a depth of 1,300 meters, with optimal depths range from 30 to 600 meters. The features of its vertical distribution in the water column and at the bottom differ significantly. In period from 2003 to 2008, in the western part of the Chukchi Sea, walleye pollock juveniles dominated in the water column by the number. Medium and large individuals accounted less than 1%. At the same time, in bottom trawl catches from 2018 to 2020, from 39 to 67% of their abundance was observed at depths up to 50 meters, and from 34 to 61% deeper than 50 meters. All medium-sized and large-sized individuals were caught at depths 50 meters. In general, the character of walleye pollock vertical distribution in the western Chukchi Sea differs little from the Bering Sea. It is also characterized by an increase in the number of large and older fish with a decrease in depth, as well as the predominance of adult fish and juveniles at shallow depths. During all the years of research, the pelagic catches were dominated by juveniles, while the size composition of walleye pollock in bottom trawl catches was bimodal. Age structure of walleye pollock was significantly different from all of Bering Sea parts, since fingerlings and yearlings predominated in the mid-water trawl catches and fish under the age of 1 year and from 6 to 17 years were the most numerous in the bottom trawl catches. These distinctions are likely due to the joint feeding in the former area of individuals belonging to different populations, having different age structures and different abundance of individual generations. So, along with the high abundance of juveniles, there is a huge number of large mature fish, but there are no model groups on which based fishing in the Bering Sea and Sea of Okhotsk. Most likely, fish of the terminal age migrate here through the Bering Strait, while juveniles are carried passively by the currents. Reproduction of walleye pollock in the Chukchi Sea has not been observed here. A short period of research in the western Chukchi Sea does not allow us to say clearly what will happen to walleye pollock in the future. Expecting a spawning of walleye pollock here is unlikely due to harsh oceanological and climatic conditions of the area. In the water column, walleye pollock abundance was low during the entire study period. In 2018, for the first time, a significant increase in the abundance and biomass was observed. In 2019, stock size continued to increase, and the bulk of biomass was formed by large-sized fish. Results in 2020 showed that the prevalence of large fish in schools contributed to the stability of biomass value at a higher level. At the same time, the age groups representing recruitment of commercial stock were not observed in the catches. This may testify that the walleye pollock population of the Chukchi Sea is not independent, and its density depends on the migration activity of individuals from the Bering Sea. Estimates of stock size allowed to recommend its commercial fishery. Total allowable catch of walleye pollock for period from 2021 to 2022 within the Russian exclusive economic zone of the Chukchi Sea was set at 37,000 tons. In 2021, total catch of walleye pollock by Russian commercial fishing vessels in the western Chukchi Sea exceeded 4,000 tons, and its fishing was carried out by 2 vessels. Walleye pollock fishing in the western Chukchi Sea cannot be considered as sustainable since bottom temperatures here are too cold to support the reproduction of the species. Thus, there are 2 possible scenarios in the future. The first one assumes the continuation of walleye pollock migrations from the Bering Sea to the Chukchi Sea. In this case, the dynamics of its abundance will be determined by the number of actively migrating adult fish. In addition, if the conditions of feeding and wintering of juvenile fish allow them to reach commercial sizes, then we can expect a notable contribution of this group to the commercial stock. Under such conditions, relatively sustainable fishing can be ensured. The second one is associated with the termination of migrations from Bering Sea to the Chukchi Sea due to climate change. In this case, walleye pollock biomass in the Chukchi Sea will decrease significantly over time due to the high natural mortality of older individuals that predominate in the population now. This will result in the loss of interest to the species as to the target of the fishery. Currently, the walleye pollock of the western Chukchi Sea has not been studied enough. Therefore, it is necessary to take into account the risk associated with low harvesting rate due to sharp fluctuations in abundance and inaccuracies of forecasting migration magnitude. All in all, it is necessary to carry out regular research surveys with subsequent assessment of fishing prospects for monitoring the state of walleye pollock stock in the western Chukchi Sea. Well, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Pavel. I think we've got a couple of questions.
Спасибо, Павел. Мне кажется, что у нас уже есть несколько вопросов.
These were great presentations.
Очень хорошие были доклады.
And I can hear the Russian translation right now, but so I don't, yeah. Why don't first, there's a couple of questions in the chat, but why don't we bring Lyle and Olga back on? And Lyle, did you have any questions for Olga or Pavel about their presentations first? Any clarifications or any comments there?
No direct questions other than I would love to receive the contact information and get some of my scientists working with both of them because we have keenly similar interests in some of the fish movement in the region, particularly with pollock and Arctic cod.
Great, thanks, Lyle. And similarly for Olga and Pavel, did you have any questions about Lyle's presentation?
У меня есть вопрос. Представлены ли ваши данные в открытом доступе?
Okay, I don't think we have that translated.
Yes,
in
I
English.
do have a question. Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead, Pavel.
Я хотел узнать,
I would
представлены
like
ли
to ask
данные
whether
американской
or not
стороны
the
в
data
открытом
presented
доступе.
by the United States colleagues, if they're available publicly online.
Yes, all of our survey data is publicly available. You can, there's a number of ways you can get it. Probably one of the easiest is you can get it off of the NOAA website. I can send you a link. Also, if you have keen interest in some of our data sets, I'm happy to get you in touch with some of our researchers to share it and actually help you to work through the tables and understand the data.
Great, thanks, Lyle. Maybe you could put that link in the chat for us.
It looks like somebody just did.
Okay.
Looks like Cindy did.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead to the chat and read a couple of the questions out. And I think this is, the question is probably to both our US and Russian speakers. Is fishing pressure similar on both sides of the national boundary line? And I don't know who could speak to that.
I guess I can speak to it for the U.S. side. I'm guessing that question has to do within the Chukchi Sea portion. If that's the case, then there is no commercial U.S. fishing allowed in the U.S. Eastern portion of the Chukchi Sea. So there is no commercial fisheries there. There is subsistence harvest, but that's it.
And maybe Pavel or Olga, if you could speak to Russian commercial fishing on the Russian side of the Chukchi.
море в российских водах
Chukchi Sea in Russian Ocean.
промысел начался только в 2020 году. До
The
этого
fishing started in
промысел мента
2020.
там не велся.
Before that, there was no commercial pollock there. And also, I would like to add something. In Chukchi Sea, the fishing with no cod, no pollock. Well, some pollock now, but in 2021, I don't know if Pavel said or not, but we only had like 4,000 tons, and it's quite less than what we predicted. But the only thing is we do have commercial fishing of cod. And this is the key species, but nothing about the invertebrates, but we say we have salmon and cod.
All right, thank you. And I guess there is a question about what are the expectations of bottom trawling as the cold pool diminishes, if it continues to diminish and fish continue to move north. Is there any response to that?
So on the U.S. side, that's kind of a question more for our policymakers more than it is for myself or my group on the science side. The part of it I can say is currently right now, the area that we define as the Northern Bering Sea is closed to bottom trawling. And so the only commercial fishing that's happening in that area is kind of similar to what Olga was just mentioning, is that there is pot fishery and long lining that's happening there now that was not happening prior to the breakdown of the cold pool. So there is long line fisheries mainly for cod in the Northern Bering Sea that's occurring now and is considered legal, but not pollock bottom trawling.
Any comments from Pavel or Olga? All right, and this question, I'm a little confused on this question. For the two vessels that fished, do you have any information on the catch rates, CPUE, of those boats compared to the other areas, for example, the Western Bering Sea? Any response there? Okay, maybe we should move on. Go ahead, Olga.
There were no observers at those vessels, so we can only judge by the size of the catch, and those that data that I gave you, there's the generalized data. The data on catches we have in the Russian Federation system data information.
All right, thank you. And then I've got another question from Jim. Fishing in the Eastern Bering Sea and Western Bering Sea, either side differs in that the Russian fishery typically extends longer into the year. The US fisheries end on October 31st, whereas the Western Bering Sea fishing on the Russian side continues into November and later. So I don't see it, that's more of a comment, I think, than a question, just that they are very different temporally. Is there any comment related to that, Lyle, Olga, or Pavel? Just on the different fishing seasons? Okay. And then the question here, why do you think, for Olga and Pavel, why do you think that the commercial harvest of pollock in the Russian portion of the Chukchi was so much less than anticipated? Was there a lack of interest from commercial companies in the auctions, or are there other reasons?
Паш, ты ответишь или я расскажу?
Paul, will you say or me? Okay, you better. As far as commercial catching in the western part of the Chukchi Sea, it's difficult because of the distance of the region. It's too far and there's a lot of ice. In Russia, the main catch is in Chukchi Sea. That's where they get about 1 million tons. And then there is Bering Sea. Yes, we had auctions last year, and the commercial catch was done by only like 3 or 4 vessels, and the fishermen unfortunately did not receive, what can I say, the catch that they expected. But so far it's too early to say. We have to check the information. We have to look at their logs for the year catch, and it is reflected in the system of the monitoring of fisheries. So in the future, if we say about the future, there's unfortunately there won't be like substantial commercial fishing in Chukchi Sea in the future.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, here's another question here. What is, and I guess for you, Lyle, what is the U.S. doing to track biomass in the areas close to commercial fishing north of the Bering Strait?
I guess to follow up on that, we do not have any commercial fishing, or at least legal commercial fishing in U.S. waters north of the Bering Strait for us to track. So, yeah, that's basically it now. We have a keen interest in trying to stand up more survey operations. We've only done a bottom trawl survey in the Eastern Chukchi Sea in 2012. We know we need to get back to try to track changes that are happening in that ecosystem, similar to what we're seeing in the Northern Bering Sea, and also what Olga and Pavel were reporting from the Western Chukchi. But as of right now, we have not been able to get that put together.
Thanks, Lyle. And we have one last question, and then we'll move on. But and this is for Pavel or Olga. Will there continue to be annual bottom trawl surveys in the Western Chukchi with similar sampling design and effort?
Планируется проведение.
We plan to do the trawl survey this year. And I would like to add something. Unfortunately, never before we did not do the like regular research. We just started it in 2018, if I'm correct, Paul, Pasha, but we researched so since 2018, 19 and 20. This is to add to my words that the interest to the Chukchi Sea and to the western sector of Arctic.
Thanks, Olga. And we're going to do one quick question, final question, and that's, does the Russian fleet record the bycatch of marine mammals or seabirds in their trawls and or in the fishing in the Gulf of Anadyr? And that's for Pavel or Olga.
Либо Павлу. No, we didn't. We do not. Well, we do not, but in the past, there was a recording of the sea mammals. Perhaps something changed. Maybe Pavel can correct me, but no, here's the question is, about during the commercial catch, it's prohibited, and so we do not catch anything. When we do the commercial catch, we do not catch anything else but what is allowed to catch within the laws, and so we don't do that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks to all three of our speakers. They were great presentations. And again, these have all been recorded. The recordings are all going to be available in both English and Russian at the end of, it'll probably take a little bit to get those online, but they'll be on the AU's website. So thank you again. We're going to move on here. And now we're going to move to speaking about crab, and we're going to talk, we're going to hear from Mike Litzow, who is the program manager with the Kodiak Laboratory for NOAA Fisheries, and he will be speaking on crab stocks on the US side of the Bering Strait. So let's go ahead with that presentation.
Hello, my name is Mike Litzow. I'm the director of the Kodiak Lab for the Alaska Fisheries Science Center. I'm also the program manager for the Shellfish Assessment Program in the Eastern Bering Sea. Today I'll be talking about the status of the Eastern Bering Sea snow crab stock and some considerations that suggest the value of a transboundary perspective for research on snow crab in the Bering Sea. Snow crab in the Eastern Bering Sea are a very high-profile issue. Until recently, snow crab supported a lucrative fishery worth several $100 million annually. But unfortunately, it appears that the stock has recently collapsed. So I'll illustrate that collapse with data from this bottom trawl survey that's conducted in the Eastern Bering Sea on this grid with standard methods every year since 1982. The right-hand plot illustrates the abundance of male snow crab plotted by carapace width from the survey annually. You can see that in 2018, we had the highest abundance ever in the time series. Very high abundance of immature crab that seemed poised to enter the population, the fishable population. But in 2019, that immature abundance was greatly reduced on survey. In 2020, we didn't go out because of COVID. And then in 2021, when we went out, we found the lowest abundance in the time series. So we've gone from the highest abundance to the lowest abundance in the last 3 years. In addition to that decline in abundance, it appears that the remaining mature component of the population is approaching senescence, and that's indicated by these changes in shell condition for female crab on survey. So in 2019, the majority of mature females were new shell animals that had just made the terminal molt into maturity and were beginning their reproductive lives. In 2021, in contrast, we see that the vast majority of mature female snow crab being either old shell or very old shell animals, indicating that their terminal molt to maturity is at least a year in the past, and they're approaching senescence without any appreciable abundance of immature animals to replace them. So given these declines in abundance, the stock was declared overfished under the U.S. Fisheries Management System this year, and the quota for the fishery for this year was cut by 88%. So that's had a tremendous economic impact on the industry, and it spurred a lot of interest in explaining the causes of the decline. Now, the most obvious explanation for the decline is just climate change. The Bering Sea has undergone a tremendous a number of years of very extreme climate anomalies recently. I've illustrated those with this time series of sea surface temperatures, annual sea surface temperatures for the Eastern Bering Sea, beginning in 1950. You can see that from 2014 through 2019, there was this series of extremely warm years that co-occurred with extremely low ice cover. A number of studies that I've pasted up in the upper right have demonstrated that these warming events, these extremely warm years, can be directly attributed to human changes to the atmosphere. But the presence or absence of sea ice in the winter is a leading determinant of bottom temperatures in the summer in the Eastern Bering Sea. And that's where this warming event becomes directly relevant to snow crab. So these are bottom trawl, bottom temperature data from the bottom trawl survey. Out on survey, we find the overwhelming majority of juvenile snow crab in temperatures less than 2 degrees. That's illustrated by this very dark blue and the next blue color. In a typical year, like 2010 or 2017, we have a cold pool of bottom water that extends all the way down to the Alaska Peninsula. But more recently, in 2019 and 2021, these cold temperatures that are preferred by snow crab are far to the north. And the traditional area that supports the majority of the snow crab stock sees an absence of temperatures that are suitable for juvenile snow crab. In addition to direct warming effects, there's a lot of interest in understanding the proximate causes of the decline. A leading hypothesis has to do with the incidence of bitter crab syndrome, which is a disease caused by the Hematodinium dinoflagellate. It's believed that this disease is typically fatal to infected crabs. On our bottom trawl survey, we collect data on visual detection of disease from collected animals. These data are imprecise, but they do suggest a very high incidence of disease coinciding with the warming event. Another leading hypothesis has to do with the loss of thermal refugia from predation. So important predators of snow crab, like Pacific cod, typically do not tolerate temperatures less than 2 degrees. But with the loss of that cold habitat, snow crab are exposed to predation, increased predation from Pacific cod and other groundfish predators. And that increased predation is illustrated by this spike in estimated snow crab consumption that again coincides with the warming event. But in addition to these declines in abundance, we're also seeing very dramatic shifts in distribution. And that's what starts to suggest the importance of a transboundary perspective. So I've illustrated these changes in distribution with centers of distribution for mature male snow crab on our bottom trawl survey going all the way back to 1975. You can see the 2021 result is the most northwest center of distribution that we've seen. And in addition, the center of effort for the commercial fishery was also shifted very far to the northwest in the last fishing year. So these are data on weighted mean centers of catch going back to the 1980s. In 2020, shifted far to the northwest from previous years. So it appears from both survey data and fisheries data that the remaining mature male component of the population is shifted right up against the international boundary. So these are data from the survey in purple and commercial catches from the last fishery in blue. However, I should stress that this change in distribution is a complex pattern. Mature females have not apparently shifted their distribution, and immature animals are now concentrated in the northern Bering Sea. We have some information that suggests that a similar range contraction may be underway in the western Bering Sea. So I've lifted this figure from this reference, plotting the median position of fishing vessels in the western Bering Sea snow crab fishery going back to the early 2000s. And you can see that the easternmost centers of effort, centers of position, are for 2018, 2019, and 2020. So there's some indication that the Bering Sea snow crab population may be contracting to the center from both east and west. We also have a strong expectation that there's connectivity between East and West based on transport of early life history stages of snow crab. That expectation comes from this study that is an individually based model study of larval delivery in snow crab from larval release sites in the Eastern Bering Sea, and modeled drift patterns, and following the persistent northwest trajectory of advection, we see an indication of delivery of Eastern Bering Sea larvae to the Western Bering Sea. So we have a strong expectation that in addition to mature males moving northwest, there's strong connectivity across the East and West Bering Sea. So given those indications of transboundary behavior in the stock, I would suggest this list of questions as potential questions of interest for a transboundary research perspective on snow crab. First of all, we'd be very much interested in understanding how much mixing or separation there is between stocks, either with genetic studies or with further life history connectivity modeling. It would be very interesting to understand how stressors such as disease and predation are affecting snow crab in both the East and the Western Bering Sea. There's a lot of interest from our fishing industry in how crab movements are changing as the Bering Sea warms so rapidly. We have a satellite tagging pilot study that's slated to get underway that will utilize animals right against the international boundary on the eastern side of the boundary. And there's also a lot of interest from management biologists in understanding how management actions on each side of the Bering Sea might interact with each other. So if anyone's interested in discussing any of these topics, please, I invite you to get in touch with me at this address. And with that, I'll thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mike. And we did have a couple of questions. So if you do have a question for the Russian crab expert who was not able to attend, please send it along to Jill Pruitt at aoos.org, and we will pass that question on and try to connect you if we can. We do have a couple of questions that, Mike, you might be able to answer. Have you seen evidence that IUU fishing, illegal fishing or trawling, whether it's bycatch or just being injured by trawlers, may be contributing to snow crab population issues?
Yeah, thanks, Molly. So good question. And our expectation is that IUU fishing, illegal or underreported fishing, is not an issue on the eastern side of the Bering Sea. There's a lot of attention concerning bycatch of snow crab from legal fisheries. I'm not an expert in that topic. My understanding from listening to the management meetings is that we expect that the total bycatch is low and is not an explanation for the declines we've seen. But I should stress that I'm not an expert in that topic.
All right, thank you for that answer. The next question is probably more of a policy question, but and we're really focusing on the science here, but have you been involved in any discussion about transboundary research or more broadly looking at the Bering Sea kind of as a whole in terms of how it's managed in terms of climate related research, et cetera, from your perspective?
I can speak to that from the crab perspective, and there's a lot of interest from the community of crab researchers on the US side in a transboundary perspective, in a holistic Bering Sea perspective. Cody Zawalski, who leads the stock assessment modeling for snow crab in the Bering, is a very good ecologist with very broad perspectives, and he's very interested in that sort of collaboration. So I haven't been involved in any conversations, and it hasn't really gone beyond interest on our side, but I'd love to reach out to our Russian colleagues and just indicate that we'd be interested in any sort of cooperative research around these issues.
Yes, and have you been involved, Mike, at all in any of the research projects for the UN Decade of Ocean Science, which tends to be more global and potentially pan-Arctic?
No, I have not myself. I know there's a lot of effort in Alaskan Arctic ocean ecology from NOAA, from the Alaska Fisheries Science Center, from the University of Alaska, but I haven't been directly involved in that work.
All right, thank you. And then another question, do you think temperature, climate is playing a role in changing size and maturity for snow crab on either the US or Russian side?
I don't have any information indicating that. You know, I should stress that I'm not a snow crab expert per se. So again, my understanding is maybe less than perfect. There's a lot of interest from the Eastern Bering Sea side right now in how we define maturity for snow crab. You know, whether we define it by the existence or the transition through the terminal molt. So Kinesides crab make a final molt at maturity, and you can define that molt morphometrically and look at a male crab and see if it's made that terminal molt, or if we should be using functional maturity, you know, the size and the ability to compete for mating opportunities as our currency of maturity in the stock assessment model. So all that is to say that there's a lot of interest in how we define maturity for managing the population on the Eastern Bering Sea side. But I'm not aware of direct temperature effects or information concerning direct temperature effects on size and maturity.
Okay, there is, let's see, question here. If disease, predation, and other stressors are impacting the snow crab population, should the sampling design be changed to support more multi-factor analyses?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And the answer is yes. We should be, you know, trying to look at these problems in population changes and distribution changes as problems in multivariate ecology. So I can say that we're working to improve our disease sampling. We're moving from visual detection of disease to PCR detection of disease. And we're in the process of working up the first few years of those data for publication this year. And then we're also able to sort of lean on a long-standing tradition of an ecosystem perspective on fisheries management that's been very healthy in NOAA for decades. And so colleagues who work with us on this bottom trawl survey have been collecting groundfish stomachs, for example, for decades. And so we have this tremendous database of food habits for predators that we're able to lean on. So those are areas of active research right now. And yes, in general, we agree that it's very much a multivariate problem.
Thanks, Mike. And just one more, I think John Simeon put a link in the chat to a recording of a recent study by World Wildlife Fund. And John, did you want to speak at all to that study? And if so, go ahead. And you may be on mute. Or you may need to be unmuted.
Can folks hear me now? Is that?
We can hear you.
Great. Well, thanks for the opportunity and really wonderful presentation by Mike. Thank you very much for that. I guess I'd just say a couple words, and it is a shame, as folks have echoed, that the Russian crab expert couldn't make it. I've worked as a consultant for World Wildlife Fund and was the main co-author of this WWF study that I linked to on Russian crab traceability. So most of my work focuses on markets of Russian crab, but that's I'll just, in doing so, when I follow Russian tax and quotas and the auctions, that it seems like in the Russian Far East that up until, it sounds like what Mike's example in terms of up until 2018, that the stock status has been doing quite well on the Russian side. And so I think that's often an area that Russians will say is, I think they look on to the issues that we've just been suffering on the Alaska side recently with quite a bit of curiosity, at least just based on my knowledge. And the only thing I'll also say is that folks like for example, like the Monterey Bay Aquarium and the Seafood Watch, I know it's more about like eating seafood, but they themselves go through studies every 5 years, and they are currently working on work on the Bering Sea and the Russian Far East for crab stocks. So hopefully in the next, say, 6 months or a year, they will be releasing their newest updates. And that's a great source of information for folks. And I've been working on some of the background Russian data for them on that. But like everyone, it'd be great to try to encourage and find out more ways of East and West Bering Sea research, scientific research, to understand these underlying shifts and changes. So thank you.
Yes, thanks so much, John. Was there any follow-up?
Yeah, can I
Mike?
respond to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, John. That's great to know. And I'll just note your point about the Western Bering Sea stock status through 2018, looks very much like our story through 2018, where, we thought we were on top of the world, and these Caenorhabdites stocks are characterized by episodic pulses of recruitment that support a limited number of years of very high harvest. And that's a real characteristic of these fisheries. And so with our existing knowledge of stock dynamics in 2018, we thought we were entering one of those pulses, and we were looking at a very lucrative spell of harvest coming up. And so it sounds like, at least through 2018, the experience on both sides of the ocean was similar. And John, just one more thing, if you wouldn't mind, just shoot me an email at my address that's on the talk there. It'd be great to connect with you and talk more about these issues.
Likewise, thank you, Mike.
Well, thanks to both of you, and thanks to others who put in the questions in the chat. And the chat will be putting that also onto the ACE website. So we're going to shift now to salmon, and we are going to start with Dr. Katie Howard from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, who will be speaking on Salmon Ocean Ecology Program at ADF&G. So let's go ahead with Katie's presentation.
Hello, I'm Dr. Katie Howard, Fisheries Scientist at Alaska Department of Fish and Game. I will be presenting on behalf of my colleagues Jim Murphy and Sabrina Garcia today. We are sharing a brief overview of the status of salmon runs in rivers flowing into the Eastern Bering Sea, characteristics of fisheries and data available for these stocks, ongoing research we are conducting on salmon in the Eastern Bering Sea that may be of interest to our Russian colleagues, and a few ideas on ways that Alaskan and Russian researchers may collaborate on salmon investigations. The Eastern Bering Sea provides important habitat for juvenile salmon originating in rivers from Bristol Bay in the south up to Kotzebue Sound in the north. Juvenile salmon rear in nearshore waters of the continental shelf during their first summer at sea. Chinook salmon from these rivers spend their entire marine life in the Bering Sea, and immature Chinook from other North American rivers are also known to use the southeastern portion of the Bering Sea seasonally. Likewise, immature chum and sockeye salmon from many river systems in Asia and North America also use Eastern Bering Sea habitats seasonally. Maturing Eastern Bering Sea river stocks of Chinook, chum, coho, sockeye, and pink salmon all migrate through the Eastern Bering Sea during their return migration. In recent years, we have seen dramatic changes in the abundance of stocks that migrate to rivers in the Eastern Bering Sea. This figure shows a broad perspective of what the 2020 runs were like for rivers that flow into the Eastern Bering Sea relative to the recent 20-year average. Bars above the thick black line are above average, those below the line are below average, and the taller the bar, the bigger the difference from the long-term average. The bright spots for Bering Sea stocks in 2020 were sockeye, primarily from Bristol Bay, and pink salmon, which have been particularly abundant in recent years in places like Norton Sound. Other species tended to be below average. While Chinook runs throughout Alaska have been poor for several years, poor chum runs were seen throughout Alaska only recently. This pattern of stock abundance was very similar in 2021. Additionally, we have seen a general decline in the age at maturity and size at age for practically all species, regardless of fishery practice. Salmon fisheries in the Eastern Bering Sea are managed by the state of Alaska using an escapement-based management model. Meeting predefined escapement goals is a top priority. These are the numbers of fish that are determined necessary to escape fishery harvest and reach spawning grounds in order to ensure long-term sustainability of the fishery. Harvests are allowed when a surplus abundance is available above those escapement needs. This management model requires extensive assessment and infrastructure for determining run abundance, escapement, and harvest levels. Among all harvest types, subsistence harvest is prioritized. Subsistence harvest is available in rural areas for food for people and dogs and cannot be used for commercial gain. In Western Alaska, subsistence harvest is very important, particularly for indigenous peoples for whom subsistence salmon fishing provides not only food for their families, but important cultural and spiritual practices. Chum and Chinook salmon make up the largest component of the subsistence salmon fisheries in these communities. The picture on the bottom right shows a salmon drying rack, which is a traditional way of preserving fish for subsistence use in this region. Subsistence harvest is the predominant harvest type in rivers north of Bristol Bay. Bristol Bay has the largest commercial salmon fishery in the U.S. and targets sockeye salmon. The fishery occurs in nearshore waters of the bay, where managers are able to direct fishery harvest to focus on stronger stocks and avoid weaker stocks by allowing more or less fishing opportunity by location. There are small commercial salmon fisheries north of Bristol Bay in coastal marine waters or in rivers. Marine salmon fishing north of Bristol Bay typically is very close to shore, as residents often use small skiffs like the one shown in the picture above. Likewise, in-river commercial salmon fishing typically uses small skiffs and gill nets or fish wheels. For the rest of this presentation, I'm going to share some research we are doing in the Eastern Bering Sea that we think may be of interest to our colleagues on the other side of the Bering Sea. One of the most important research projects we currently have is an annual marine surface trawl survey in the Northeastern Bering Sea. On this map to the right, each black dot represents a sampling station in that survey. These surveys were initiated by NOAA's Alaska Fisheries Science Center almost 20 years ago to understand the early marine life of salmon in the Eastern Bering Sea. ADF&G has partnered with them to continue the survey and associated juvenile marine salmon research for several years. These surveys occur in September of each year, and the survey gear primarily targets smaller pelagic fish like juvenile salmon, herring, and capelin. Most of the salmon caught in this survey are juveniles, which are fish that have just spent their first summer in the ocean. Most of the juvenile salmon in the Northern Bering are from the Yukon River and Norton Sound. The abundance of juvenile salmon estimated from this survey is used to forecast future adult run abundance. In addition to forecasting tools, this survey provides information on the health and status of salmon in the ocean and their ecosystems. One of the key findings from this survey is that good or bad Yukon River Chinook salmon run abundance is determined before we sample these fish at the end of their first summer at sea. At least this has been the case since the survey began in 2003. Consequently, we can use this information not only to identify drivers of run abundance, but also to use the juvenile abundance to forecast future adult run sizes for Yukon River Chinook salmon. Information on juvenile salmon abundance in marine waters during September of their first year in the ocean is a very useful predictor of adult run sizes. To create run size forecasts, we combine juvenile abundance estimates from these surveys, along with genetic information and estimated maturity schedules based on maturity rates. These forecasts provide expectations for runs up to 3 years into the future. These figures show Canadian origin Yukon River Chinook on the top and total Yukon River Chinook abundance on the bottom. The gray bars are the observed run sizes since 2003. The black dotted line and error bars depict the range of forecasted values expected across these years based on this juvenile abundance data. As you can see, we expect low runs to the Yukon River over the next years, on par with some of the lowest runs ever recorded. Fueled by the low chum returns in 2020 and 2021, we are also working on developing a juvenile salmon-based run forecast model for Yukon River fall chum. Another key takeaway we wanted to share is that the Eastern Bering Sea is changing rapidly, and these changes affect salmon. We are seeing more southern salmon stocks moving north. We see different food available to juvenile salmon in recent warmer years, and in really warm years, we are seeing more salmon with empty stomachs, presumably because the warm water increases their metabolism and energy demand. Even marine heat waves in the Gulf of Alaska and North Pacific Ocean affect Bering Sea salmon, because species other than Chinook move through both Bering Sea and North Pacific Ocean habitats. We also see changes in the age and size composition of the runs. And what we found is that when we see more of these very large juvenile Chinook in the ocean, more of those fish are returning to the Yukon as what we call jacks, age 3 and 4 fish, rather than the older and larger adults. Much of the fate of Eastern Bering Sea salmon runs is determined very early in their life, by the end of their first summer at sea, and that fate is changing rapidly as the Bering Sea gets warmer. One of the newer projects we've undertaken and led by Sabrina Garcia is to opportunistically tag salmon sharks that are incidentally caught during our pelagic trawl surveys. While the trawl surveys provide good information for lower trophic levels, large predator information is generally lacking in the Eastern Bering Sea. These tagging data provide new information on behavior of one large predator species known to feed on salmon. To date, 3 salmon sharks have been tagged in the Eastern Bering Sea. 2 types of tags have been placed on each shark: a PSAT tag that records light, depth, and temperature encountered by the shark and which lasts for about 1 year, and a spot tag that provides location data and can last for about 3 years. 1 year of tracking data for one of our tagged sharks, who we call Lawrence, are shown in this video. This shark was captured just south of St. Lawrence Island in September, and the dots represent locations received by satellites and are color-coded for each month. You can see that this shark traveled south after tagging, migrating to the area around the Emperor Seamount chain in October and November, headed east towards the eastern North Pacific for winter months, before traveling west again and back up into the Bering Sea. This shark is still out there collecting data. There are several areas where Alaskan and Russian researchers could potentially collaborate on salmon research. These include, but are not limited to, assessing stock compositions of Chinook salmon encountered on both sides of the basin to better understand marine migration patterns. An example is shown here of immature Chinook salmon stock compositions caught in research surveys in the Eastern Bering Sea. Only North American Chinook stocks seem to be using the Eastern Bering Sea shelf in late summer and early fall. We could also benefit from comparative analyses of salmon stocks and ecology on both sides of the Bering Sea basin. We can work together to improve genetic baselines for salmon on both sides of the basin, Also, we can share more on the salmon shark tagging work. Sabrina Garcia has already been in contact with Russian colleagues about providing tags that can be opportunistically deployed when encountering salmon sharks. Thank you for your time. My Alaskan colleagues and I are available to answer any questions. I can also be reached through my email address or our Facebook page, ADF&G, the Undersea World of Salmon and Sharks.
Thank you so much for that, Katie. That was a great presentation. We're going to hear first from two Russian colleagues first, and then we will open it up to questions after that. So we will go to Victoria Chilcote, who's an independent expert, and Alexander Bonk from Kamchatka State Technical University, and they will be speaking on Russian Far East Alaska collaboration in educating future generations of salmon biologists and fishery managers. So we'll go to those presentations.
Здравствуйте.
Здравствуйте, коллеги.
Уважаемые друзья,
Нас
уважаемые
хорошо
коллеги,
слышно?
позвольте представить вам небольшую информацию о сотрудничестве Университета Аляски и Дальневосточных университетов в области подготовки специалистов по исследованию и управлению запасами тихоокеанских лососей. Наше сотрудничество началось в далеком уже 2011 году, когда при поддержке ВВФ мы начали на базе нашего университета проводить семинары с приглашением специалистов с Университета Аляски, с Университета Вашингтона, занимающихся исследованием и управлением тихоокеанским лососем. Такие семинары у нас проходили до 2015 года, и вот в 2015 году мы пришли к выводу, что надо расширять наше взаимодействие, сотрудничество, но несколько в другой области. Мы решили заняться академическим обменом студентов и преподавателей. Между двумя университетами, нашим и Университетом Аляски, был заключен меморандум о сотрудничестве и взаимопонимании. И как следствие этого меморандума в 2016 году появилась возможность нашим студентам посетить Аляску. Летом 2016 года двое студентов и ваш покорный слуга посетили Аляску, где познакомились с Питером Вестли, его студентами. И в ходе этой поездки мы знакомились с методами управления лососем, какие исследования проводились, где проводились. У нас была прекрасная поездка на Кинайский полуостров, мы посетили биостанцию Аликидник, мы посетили биостанцию.
Pardon us for a minute. I think we need the Russian interpreter to go to the Russian room. We can hear the Russian in the English room.
I am in the English room.
You should be in the Russian room.
Jill, do we want to restart it?
I think that's probably a good idea.
Pretty incomprehensible.
Stephanie, if we could go, to the beginning again, and then let's give this another try.
And also, can we get it in slideshow as opposed
Здравствуйте,
to presenter?
уважаемые друзья, уважаемые коллеги, позвольте представить вам небольшую информацию.
We're still
Sorry,
hearing
that's how the recording was sent to me. So sorry about that.
Can we do the recording where it's a little quieter so we actually can hear the translation? We can't hear the translation.
And since I'm translating into English, I should probably be in the English room after all.
Yes, please.
Isn't that right? Yeah, little point for me to be in Russian room.
Okay, let me start it.
It's always challenges doing these simultaneous translations.
Информацию о сотрудничестве Университета Аляски и Дальневосточных университетов в области подготовки специалистов по исследованию и управлению запасами тихоокеанских лососей.
let's try again. Maybe the presentation should be in the Russian room, or
Please excuse me. Can you hear me? I did the same mistake during question and answer session. I was connected to English chat room, so the speaker need to change the chat room, but not the interpreter.
Okay, let me see if I can go into the Russian room, if that will fix it. Hold on just a second.
Thanks for your patience, everyone. Just stand by.
Сейчас.
Здравствуйте, уважаемые друзья, уважаемые
Hello
коллеги.
again, dear friends and colleagues. Let me introduce a brief information, brief update on the cooperation between Alaskan and Russian Far Eastern universities in the field of training new experts in fishery management and fishery research. Our cooperation dates back to now remote year of 2015, when World Wildlife Fund provided support for our university to host seminars with invitation of experts from Alaska, Washington State University, who deal with research and management of Pacific fisheries. We did those exchanges until 2015, at which year we decided that collaboration should be expanded and shifted into a slightly different direction. We decided to start academic exchanges of students and researchers between our university and Alaska State. We signed a memorandum of mutual understanding, and as a direct consequence, in the year 2016, the first exchange actually materialized. Our students had the chance to visit Alaska. In the summer of that year, two students and myself, your humble servant, visited Alaska, where we met Peter Wesley, his students. As part of the trip, we familiarized ourselves with American fishery management techniques, with research in the field, with where they were conducted. We had a wonderful trip to Kenai Peninsula Biological Research Station Elikagni, another on Lake Nerka, Lake Sokai, and the next stage of our interaction was a trip of American students to our biological station situated at River Call. That's on the world's only wildlife refuge for salmon. Students, my full team of students met their American counterparts. So they learned in what environment we conduct our research. We were able to do comparisons, to draw comparisons, and American students were very forthcoming with their own research. This round of exchanges continued in the year 17, when Elikagnik Biological Research Station hosted a school for bachelor students. Two more of my master or bachelor students took part in this exchange.
Tom Quinn, Myla Atkinson,
and Megan McPhee presented. Next year, 2018, we brought to Alaska two of our bachelor and master students. The previous year's workshop was on fishery stocks management. This year's exchange had the ecological bent. At the same time, we, with Megan McPhee, decided discussed opportunities to develop a new curriculum for our students in salmon biology. What came out of this idea was the development of teaching materials, specific salmon, the state of stocks and management. This will be published in the very immediate future. After this 2018 workshop, we visited a wonderful event also held in Kenai Peninsula, the world famous Salmon Festival. By the way, Kamchatka celebrates its own Salmon Festival as well. Of course, the pandemic put an axe to that these last 2 years. Maybe this year, this summer will be different. Our cooperation on student exchanges continued through the year 19. The Kegnik station again held a workshop on salmon management. 2 of my master's program students took part. Studies apart, it was not all lecturing format or theoretical format. They tried to get themselves directly involved in management activities. We also had a great cultural program. Visited various canneries, research centers. That same year, we visited another part of Alaska, Prince William Sound, where we saw a somewhat different system of salmon stock management. In Cordova, we all arrived at the conclusion that this cooperation should be extended even further and involve other institutes of learning from the Far East. I would like to mention that as a product of this exchanges going on from 2016, was not simply that we enlarged the horizons of our students or met their American counterparts. Another direct result is that part of my students who visited Alaska continued in this field, continued to be salmon experts. Tanya, in one of these pictures, now works in the Ministry of Fisheries. Cyril starts sockeye. It's not that many of our students visited, but they met a wide circle of American counterparts, and most of them also linked their professional careers with Pacific salmon. Since the idea of expanding this collaboration has been supported by my American colleagues, we planned in the year 20 invite 2 more universities to join. Sakhalin State University and Far Eastern Federal University. Unfortunately, COVID put paid to all that, but we arrived at the conclusion that if we cannot participate in person, we may try to set up a virtual exchange or a virtual workshop. As a result, we set up such a virtual workshop come student conference. One was held this last December. And here you see the header for our next one on February 2nd, which will be attended by students from all 4 universities. You are all naturally invited. And at this, I'd say thank you very much. And I'm also very grateful to all the participants in these exchanges and all those who offered their support. Thank you very much, Alexander Anatolovich, as an interpreter and a fixture in these programs during several years, and now a coordinator of the self-same program to an extent. I would like to thank those trailblazers who started work in this area. It's thanks to them, to people like Megan McPhee, Peter West, and Alexander Bank, that this program became a reality, and also the support by World Wildlife Fund in Alaska and Russia was crucial. Why is it that although we have
идет виртуальное сотрудничество,
this rather successful virtual cooperation and student conference, while we have all that, I would like to emphasize how important it is to meet face-to-face as well, in person, how important it is to collaborate directly. For one thing, it allows the students to have a direct exposure to a different educational system in the fishery area, to learn, to become inoculated with a different model of educational. And this is a two-way street, since there's a lot of student-to-student learning going on. And it offers a valuable combination of theoretical learning and on-hands learning. Mr. Bong just mentioned that this intense summer courses, students have an opportunity not just to listen to wonderful lecturers and known experts in this particular field, but also apply this knowledge immediately with their own hands, have a practice, have a hand. Students also had the opportunity to learn in depth the fisheries management system of Alaska, to establish, to network for future exchanges. Some of them maintain those exchanges still. And also students learned, the students met each other. It gave them to know more about their respective cultures in general, not only about fishery management. And the most important thing is, in my opinion, that students gain a deeper, more in-depth knowledge of our environmental challenges and a very special feeling of connection to the world of salmon and wildlife in general, since they're able to be outdoors, out there during those exchanges. Thank you all very much, and I call on all the participants of today's virtual meeting, some of whom are either experts in the field or teachers in the field, to join our exchange program and support these collaborative efforts in salmon biology research and salmon stocks management. Thank you all.
Thank you to both Victoria and Alexander for that. And Victoria did post in the chat the link to the February 2nd, 3rd presentations with a Zoom link there if you want to join them and hear the presentations as well. So we do have time for some questions for Victoria, Alexander, and Katie Howard from Fish and Game. And I don't see any questions in the chat at the moment, although I think there may be one person who has her hand raised. I can't see the hands raised on my screen. So was there someone there? I actually don't think I was talking, not sure I was chatting with everyone. Stephanie, is there someone with a hand raised?
I don't.
And if not, maybe there. Okay. Katie, Alexander, Victoria, do you have questions for each other?
I actually do have a question for Katie, if it's okay.
Go ahead.
I'm wondering if the program you described, this of surveying Eastern Bering Sea, collaborates in any way with the International Year of Salmon program and their vessel and surveys that they are doing, and whether you compare results or put them together in any way. And yeah, maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, we are. Many of us who regularly participate in the Northern Bering Sea survey are also participating in the on the US vessel for the International Year of the Salmon. And we do hope to be able to connect some of those pieces of data where we're looking at information on salmon after their first few months at sea, but then also looking at those same cohorts of salmon in the IYS survey in the North Pacific Ocean. So that will be really interesting to see how those pieces of data come together.
Thanks, Katie. And I know the Alaska Ocean Observing System is funding a glider session as well to go along with the IYS ship surveys as well. So we will have all of that underwater data as well. Maybe we could see Victoria and Alexander, what you think are the main differences in salmon management based on your experience with your exchanges over the past years. What do you see as the main difference between how Kamchatka manages salmon and how the US side is managing salmon?
Меня слышно?
Да.
Ну, первое, самое большое различие в управлении.
The first and biggest difference in salmon management is that the catch on the Russian side is established as quotas, whereas it's a free catch on the US side. That's the biggest difference.
I think the response was that the Russian side has quotas and the US side, which Katie, you might want to respond to that.
Ну, на американской
Did I misunderstand you?
стороне объем
On
вылова
the US side, the overall volume is not limited. No, this is confusing. Says the overall volume of catch is established. Whereas the US sets the overall quota for overall volume caught. In Russia, specific quotas are assigned to specific entities involved in fishing. That, I think, is what you said.
Yes, thank you.
Did you have something there, Katie?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I kind of mentioned it in the presentation that on the US side, we, for Alaska, it's an escapement-based management. So we're trying to estimate how many fish are coming back. And of those fish, how many need to make it to the spawning grounds. And then we're only allowing harvest on what is above that amount. And so it is a different management approach.
Yes, Katie, thank you. I probably would like to just add that on the Alaskan side, there is a longer history of escapement counts and a longer database to basically base the whole allowable catch of the next year and other decisions on that data. In addition to that, well, on the Russian side, escapement is counted as well where it is possible. In Kamchatka, actually, they are very good at escapement counting, and they have sonar stations installed in some places and weirs, counting weirs installed. So there is quite a bit of data on that coming from Kamchatka. There are some areas in the Russian Far East, the Amur River, for example, where so far escapement counting is not on par with where they would like it to be. And their institution right now is trying to implement the use of drones actually to count escapement, which they call more, I guess the Russian term is filling of spawning grounds. So they are actually counting how much fish is arriving to the spawning grounds. They have very good, very extensive data on the areas of spawning grounds, and that's the data that they base their in-season decisions on оперативные данные. So that is somewhat different.
I have to unmute myself. There are a couple of questions in the chat. One is, with the warming temperatures in the Bering, where should the focus be on salmon research to improve salmon survival?
Alexander Anatolyevich.
Anyone there? Victoria, Katie, Alexander?
Victoria just asked Alexander to field that one.
Okay, Alexander.
Не скажу, что я прям плотно занимаюсь океанским
I
лососем.
wouldn't say that I deal with oceanic salmon all that much, but speaking from my experience of previous years as a researcher in Kamchatka Fisheries Institute, I would say that we need annual surveys everywhere along Kamchatka shores. The International Year of the Salmon just showed us that it's doable, that we should tie together chunks of data obtained on both sides of the international border. And by doing that, we'll get a pretty representative data about the state of salmon stocks in Bering Sea as a whole.
Any, Victoria or Katie, did you want to comment to that?
Oh, there is probably a lot that we can talk about. The issue, the main issue is the ability to arrange maybe collaborative international efforts, right? And that ability is limited right now, unfortunately. But there is actually the need to maybe provide more information and figure out the impacts of climate change to southern stocks, salmon stocks, and that I would say is most relevant right now and most burning for southern Sakhalin and for the Amur River stocks. I know that scientists and environmental groups in those regions are, they would like to see maybe studies and especially on chum salmon that basically the impacts of climate change to southern chum salmon stocks. If there is some way to collaborate on that issue and maybe put together something, that would be great. That would be very helpful to them right now.
There was a question about whether the Kamchatka escapement counts are available to the public. Do you know, Victoria or Alexander?
То, что касается оперативных данных по исследованию, они закладываются в прогноз возможного изъятия.
As far as ongoing data, they made part of the forecast of allowable catch, and they are released to the general public only a year later. When the full forecast for next year catches is released, then all this data on the escapement becomes available.
So if I'm to understand correctly, your past year's data is available when the forecast for the next year becomes available. Is that correct?
Да, примерно так.
Yeah, roughly so. That's the general idea.
And by public, is it public across, or is it public on just on the Russian side, or is it available to everyone across the globe?
К сожалению, информация о состоянии запасов.
Unfortunately, this information of the state of stocks is considered to be classified information in Russia. It's not public the same way it is in Alaska. We don't publish daily data on salmon runs, for instance. We have nothing like that. Usually, after we've done our field research on any species, the salmon, In particular, researchers develop their forecasts, and based on those forecasts, they're allowed to publish scientific findings as a scientific article.
And I think, Pavel,
specific numbers are usually not quoted on salmon runs on this or that river.
and I think Pavel noted in the chat that a lot of the data that is public is available from the North Pacific Anadromous Fish Commission. So that might be another source. And I know there was some questions. There's a lot of interest, of course, in salmon bycatch and how to reduce salmon bycatch in other fisheries, such as the groundfish fisheries and others. And maybe any of the Russian colleagues want to comment on salmon bycatch reduction on the Russian side. And I might open that up to either the salmon folks or the groundfish folks, whoever would like to comment on that. Anyone there? Could be either Pavel or Olga or, yeah. No comments?
Александр Анатольевич, давайте.
Да, позвольте мне.
Allow me, this is Alexander again.
Go ahead.
Я много лет в свое время занимался именно тrawling съемками.
I looked at trawling for many years previously, and I will say that when we talk about trawling for pollock in the Bering Sea and for herring in fall, bycatch of salmon has been low, probably negligibly low. So if we talk about commercial fisheries, commercial fishing, it probably does not affect young salmon populations abundance in Western Bering Sea, or such an impact is negligible.
Yeah, I would add, if you mean, for example, Chinook salmon bycatch while fishing for other species, for example, I think things are a bit different, set up differently in Russia, so that well, the fishing gear is different and such, but also what happens is that Chinook is mostly open to fishery, especially where it is present mostly in Kamchatka in a larger number, so they're not worried about Chinook bycatch at this point. They simply take it.
Thanks, Victoria. John Simeon, did you want to comment on that? And you were running out the door, so okay, you will be heading out. Any other comments maybe from any of our speakers? I think everyone clearly wants to continue these kinds of conversations and sharing of information. We view the Bering Sea as one sea, and it's important to know what's going on both sides, on both countries' waters. The Alaska Ocean Observing System has a project with World Wildlife Fund to make as much biological data available from both the US side and the Russian side, and have that data in our data portal, have it translated, the metadata translated into both Russian and English, so that we really can see that big picture, because clearly the species don't see a wall in the middle of the ocean there. Are there any final comments from any of our speakers today about how better and what other ways everyone can help promote this kind of scientific sharing and cooperation? Because certainly I think the scientists themselves see the value of it, the public sees the value of it, and of course we have to get the politicians to see the value of it as well. But any final comments on that, that anyone would like to make, any of our speakers? And that can be from our Russian speakers or our US speakers. Mike? Mike, did you want to comment?
Sure. I just wanted to say that our salmon colleagues seem to have set the standard for building collaboration over time. And I think any effective collaboration between the research community and the two nations will require repeated interactions. So I just look forward to this sort of exchange of ideas continuing in the future. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Any other comments? Lyle, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I'll just kind of reiterate and kind of throw behind what Mike just said as well, is that we're really keen to try to find ways to open doors to have more collaborative and cooperative science between ourselves and our Russian colleagues. And forums like this help us to become aware of what's going on, what's happening on both sides of the border. But we really, really are hoping that we can get to a point where we're kind of looking at collaborative research efforts to understand what's going on across the border as well. And that'll take a lot more meetings, and hopefully we can get there.
Thanks, Lyle. Any additional comments? And I know, do check the chat because there are some additional collaborations that are being posted in there. We will have a recording of the chat, and that will be posted on the AUS website. And we will have recording of this that will be in both English and Russian that will be posted. It'll take a while to get that, a little bit to get that finalized. But all of the presentations will also be available. I want to thank all of the translators. They did a great job of following along. The translators are not necessarily scientists themselves, so translating from these presentations is always, I think, a challenge, and I think they did an excellent job. I want to thank World Wildlife Fund for providing the funding for the translators and really supporting these Science Corner conversations. We've had a multi-species one last year. We've held one on seabirds, this one on fisheries. I think our next one is going to, we hope to be on marine mammals. And then an additional one at some point on kind of marine protected areas and conservation areas on both sides of the boundaries. So stay tuned for all of those. Jill put in the chat the links to the previous corners. We do want to thank everyone also for your patience in some of the technical difficulties. Doing these does present a whole different kind of challenge, having the multiple translations, and but we try to get them pre-recorded so we can work out the bugs, but clearly there are always new bugs that we encounter when we do these kinds of things. But I want to thank all of you. At one point we had over 150 people online, which is an incredible participation. Margaret Williams from World Wildlife Fund, do you want to just do a final closing here? Again, this is Molly McCammon with Alaska Ocean Observing System. I want to thank Jill Pruitt, who's really been our person behind the scenes on all of this. And Margaret, do you want to just do the final farewell?
Sure, and just even though we're miles and miles apart with some of our Russian colleagues and across the country, you can just feel the good energy and all the excitement about sharing information. Indeed, there are forums for collaboration. They're formal. There's the US-Russia agreement. There is the Arctic Council somebody brought up. And I think the more that you all can follow up on these kinds of communications and that we can take advantage of these little seeds of communication and growth, the more momentum we build. And those personal relationships are so important and so valuable. So in a way, this kind of forum, living in Zoom, is sort of helpful for us to connect with our Russian colleagues. But of course, in person will be so much better. So keep an eye out for our next webinars, and we will continue to do this. And thank you for all of your great comments and encouragement in the chat.
Thank you, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.